Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. This is going to be a really interesting episode because someone reached out to me to talk about what they've been going through, and they are a recording engineer and human rights representative speaking about Havana Syndrome and electronic harassment with the use of directed energy weapons. So, for the purpose of this show, we're going to call her Brenda. So, Brenda, welcome to the show. And I know it's a bit nervy, isn't it, for you to do this, but we're going to do a little presentation. You've put this together for us, haven't you? And you're going to tell us about how you've been targeted with this, haven't you?
Yes, thank you, John. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity. Appreciate being given the platform to share this information. It's important to get to the general public. So thank you very much. Okay, so I'll begin by just discussing my own experiences and what led me to being in this situation. So basically, Havana Syndrome, in short, is a way of targeting people remotely using highly advanced technology. And just to give you a bit of a brief outline, so in the past, I was a recording engineer. I did other forms of work over the years. I went to school, college, uni, did a bit of traveling, led a normal life. A few years back, I had a life-changing event take place, which I now believe was partially engineered, and then these strange symptoms started. One of the main symptoms that I began to experience was hearing voices. Now, I'm not an expert, but I do know that schizophrenia does not operate in this fashion. I could converse with them back and forth in real time, at length, very speedily as well. And I just did a few really basic thought experiments, just sat in silence on my sofa. I did a deep dive into my memories and dug out some memories I'd not thought of in decades and just sat there and thought about them. And sure enough, they were commented upon in real time, narrated in great detail, and I just sat there in shock, and my blood ran cold because I realised this is not just voices. There's got to be some kind of a connection here to my brain. There's no other explanation for this at all. So I then did some audio-based experiments and tried to figure out what was going on, rule a few different things in or out. And in all honesty, I had a meltdown. I was not okay. I was very scared. But I did some research and some networking. And then I had a security guy come and scan my property. And they didn't find anything. But the day that they arrived and came to do this for me, further down the corridor in my building, another flat, there were some people coming out of there that I'd not seen before. And they had a hell of a lot of equipment with them. They had flight cases, cameras, tripods, microphones, cables, and lots of it. And they saw me, and they didn't look very best pleased that I'd seen them with all this equipment. So I now think the security guy didn't pick anything up in my property because whatever was in my property in terms of covert devices were passive, and therefore a normal sort of bug detector might not detect them. And they seemed maybe to be more concerned about the equipment in their apartment and were removing it that day for that purpose. That's what I believe anyway. So yeah, the networking and researching, I learned about Havana Syndrome, that civilian victims are referred to as targeted individuals. I found numerous support groups around the world and flew to the EU to meet with one of them, where I was scanned inside a Faraday cage at a renowned university. This group is called IPATOR, and I've been helping them ever since. I'm the UK board member and a representative to them. So for me, what I've experienced from start to present day is the voices, stalking, hacking, acts of sabotage, and induced physical, visual, and auditory-based symptoms. It is quite horrific, but as soon as I met other victims going through the same and realised they've been going through it a lot longer, they can cope, so can I. It helped. It helped a lot. I also learned that a lot of victims are busy collecting as much evidence as they possibly can get. So I started doing that as well. And I've collected quite a bit of technical based evidence, but most of mine is medical evidence. My health has gone downhill since this began. And because there was this engineered life event, the people doing this to me have had somewhat of a head start on me as well. So I went private for a few tests. I made a list of my own symptoms and then the tests that the impacted diplomats of Havana Syndrome typically reporting and having done. Went away and did as many of those as I possibly could. And I've been diagnosed with around 10 conditions, which are nearly all either immune, neurological, hearing, or balance related health conditions. And I've been entered into two NHS studies on this, one to do with the brain, one to do with immune issues. So I'm getting excellent healthcare, and they've assured me that while these are showing as quite strongly present in my blood, and it's concerning because they don't run in my family, I've not had a head injury, it's not my lifestyle, that it's quite strange, but they've been caught early. So I'm quite lucky in that sense. I'm getting really good healthcare. I then was introduced to a doctor, a neurotherapist type doctor, and sent all my files over to them and was able to obtain a diagnosis of Havana Syndrome, and that my symptoms are caused by microwaves exposure. And then earlier this year, I was able to get a second report, which is actually from a mental health specialist, a psychiatrist. That, in short, basically says that there is depression and anxiety, but it's secondary, and this is actually the real cause of these health issues. So that's basically my story, sort of up to date. What I'd like to do now is move on to the next slide. Okay, so this slide is just a few images, almost showing a sort of chronological timeline of events to help understand what's gone on over the decades, that Havana Syndrome and civilian victims of this have been going through it much longer, and just give you a bit of a timeline of events so you can join the dots together. So, as I said, the Havana Syndrome news broke into the media around 2016 when a USA diplomat stationed in Havana, Cuba, reported some strange symptoms that they felt were being remotely induced upon them. But civilians have been going through this a lot longer, silently almost, for decades prior to this. Now, a lot of people are more than familiar with high-ranking members of the SS and Nazis who were doing a lot of experiments back then, continued their, let's say, good work in America. And a few years later, we've got things like the MK Ultra CIA experimentation program. A lot of people going through this would link the release of the DSM-5 and the European version, the ICD, the Book of Psychiatric Mental Health Disorders, as somewhat of a smokescreen to sort of cover some of the aspects relating to this up. I'm not too sure. I do believe in mental health and trauma and what it can do. I just do not agree with how these services operate globally. We can sort of almost jump forward a little bit and go straight to 9/11, and I don't mean the horrific events of that day. I mean what it allowed the governments to then do, which was a lot of control, opening the fusion centres, which exist in many of the countries, not just in America, just typically under different types of names. We can jump forward to then like what Edward Snowden did, leaking a lot of information. And a lot of victims would lump into this sort of category, COVID and the vaccines and the 5G deployment. So that's how a civilian, typically a civilian victim of this, would describe this to you if they were going to give you a bit of a timeline to help you join the dots. So I'm just going to move slides here. So this is just a brief Havana Syndrome timeline. So what happened is it broke into the media 2016 and was dubbed Havana Syndrome purely where the first diplomat reporting it was stationed at the time. Donald Trump was in power at the time, and he appointed a medical team out of Miami University, with the head of this being Dr. Michael Hoffer, to investigate, who has gone on and treated numerous of the diplomats and a few civilians as well. And I believe he's continued to do that since then. In 2021, a member of Kamala Harris's entourage, they were flying to Singapore and their flight was delayed because one of her staff members was actually affected by this. Congress started the Havana Act, which was signed by President Biden and provided compensation to a lot of the victims. Havana Syndrome around that time was renamed as AHIs, so Anomalous Health Incidents. The National Academies held webinars with experts and guest speakers, one of whom is the renowned neurologist Professor James Giordano. That helped with the media a lot. There's numerous legal firms in primarily America and Canada who've represented numerous of the diplomats that have been affected. In more recent years, there are various neurorights bills which have been passed, which I'm going to come back to these shortly. Another group named Advanced Echelon, which I believe consists of some ex-military personnel, was formed, and they are investigating into Havana Syndrome and continuing to do so. More recently in the news, from around 2024 to now, the main sort of stories that have continued to emerge in the media is the USA now believes that Russia is to blame for this. Now, I can't say that for certain, obviously, but there is a bit of a timeline of events here. Edward Snowden leaked his details, as we all know. Putin offered him exile, and then just a few years later, Havana Syndrome broke into the media. Again, I'm just sort of speculating here, but it does kind of fit. But yeah, so that's basically just a brief timeline of events to bring people up to speed. Now, the reason that I say that these neurorights bills, which I'm now going to discuss, are important, is because of what it consists of. So the first place that did this is their website, the Neurorights Foundation. So they founded in, I believe, 2020 and proposed a piece of legislation to the Chilean government, which was to protect Chilean residents from emerging technologies that use EEG, brain sort of computer interface-based technology, consumer things like virtual reality and these types of things, which are just becoming vastly more and more popular around the world. The bill was passed, and they then filed a legal case against a company called Emotive out of San Francisco, who developed these types of products. And they won this case, and it was ordering them to delete all brain data they've collected from any Chile residents, and that they will never be able to sell any of their products in Chile. So this is basically a legal precedent. I think I've not heard of any other legal case along these lines that has won. So while the words Havana Syndrome might not be on their website, it directly relates to this. And as I go on throughout the talk, that will become more understood and apparent. So it's crucial, and numerous other countries have now followed suit. As you go down this website, what's new? So there's been, I think in Spain, there we go, yes, Spain. Other parts of Europe, there's been, I think Colorado and California are two states that have passed similar bills, and it's just spiraling. There's so many different states and countries that are starting to follow suit with this. It's very, very important, and rightly so, with the types of technology that are becoming more and more available to the general public. What I would say, as I just prepare to move on, is that civilian victims are typically referred to as targeted individuals. It's not really any different to the diplomats that I'm describing, who are victims of Havana Syndrome or AHI, anomalous health incidents. The main difference that I would say is the reason behind it. And the diplomats and governmental staffers and a few, I think, intelligence agency staffers are being chosen as they are credible people and with the sole purpose of exposing the crime. Okay, so just moving on again. So I'm just going to describe some of the technology and experiences that are typically reported from civilian victims of this. So some of the technology that's used is a brain-computer interface, which allows us to access the brain and conduct mind reading, which will normally be referred to as remote neural monitoring, and physically induced symptoms, auditory, physical, visual symptoms induced remotely. A lot of people will state, or some can actually prove, that they've been implanted with foreign objects non-consensually. And this could be a larger style chip that might even be found under an X-ray, or it could be nanotechnology that makes it into the bloodstream. A lot of victims report hearing voices, which in the victims community we refer to as V2K, or voice to skull technology. This basically bypasses the ear completely and goes straight to the cochlea and to the brain. And they are carrier waves because they just cannot be heard floating around. They're unique to each person. Very invasive. Very invasive indeed, yeah. Another main aspect of this is stalking, and it's referred to in the victims community as gang stalking. It's incredibly highly organized and coordinated and intends to keep the victim in a constant state of fear and isolation as well. Hacking, acts of sabotage, uh, elements of sort of social engineering and influencing. It's very multifaceted, multifaceted indeed. But the one thing that I would say is common with every single instance of this is to do with control. At the core, it's control. So a civilian, they could be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Some say it's their neighbours. Some say they're ex-military. Some are whistleblowers, religious defectors. Some say their family and friends did this to them from birth and put them into some kind of a research program. Lots of veterans, people who report wrongdoing in the workplace and they just happen to report the wrong person who has a lot of connections could end up being targeted. And then there are some who have no clue why this has begun. In these instances, I would personally think it's the health services and that they might have actually done this to them from birth and just put them into a research program non-consensually. So yeah, basically, the technology being used to do this, a lot of it is military-based applications and technology. We can assume or say that intelligence agencies are involved in this, the police, health services, mental health services, telecommunications companies. Some will say that they've been placed into a particular place of work via a recruitment agency and believe that they had some level of involvement. Landlords, estate agents, random members of the public probably just paid money without even being told exactly what they're getting themselves into to stalk and intimidate people. There is what I would refer to as a hierarchy of criminal activity going on here. We've got the grunts, who are the ground troops, right up to the head of this, using the main pieces of technology to conduct this as well. So the military intelligence agencies, police certainly are involved, and then as it goes down, we've got like what you would say are the ground troops in all of this. So yeah, I'll just give you a really quick example. Every month this year, I've had something done to me in the sense of some kind of a strange thing or an act of sabotage. And the most recent one was I got an email saying, "Here is your social security number." Days later, your social security number has now been stopped due to suspicious activity. And then days later, my bank details were attempted to have been used in a USA Hilton hotel. I have never set foot there in my life, and that is just one thing that's happened recently. But something like that has happened to me every single month this year. So I'll just move on to the next slide so we can go into a bit about the technology used to do this. So when I introduced myself and went through my own experiences, I will say that usually with a victim, there has to be a brain-computer interface, which allows remote neural monitoring. As you can see in this image, it's just giving you basically how that data is taken and fed into a person's brain. And the next slide will depict how they maintain these connections to the person as well. So it allows, with the remote neural monitoring, a connection to the central nervous system, and that's how these physically induced auditory, visual, physical symptoms are induced. Now, I'm not a doctor and I'm no expert on this, but I've done a lot of my own experimenting. I've been to caves, I've been in Faraday cages, I've been underwater, I've been on a plane on holiday, and to meet with my association in Belgium, and nothing stops. And that's what most people will say as well. Now, the people conducting this will have to take into account variables and factors, some things like Does the victim wear a sign to live in an urban or rural area? Do they have a car? Are they driving around a lot? Do we need vehicles ready to go whenever they go out? Things like this. So they need to take into account these types of things. Your own devices, your phone, laptop can be utilized against you as weapons. Signals can be sent to them and bounced off of them. Like a phone, for instance, it has a proximity sensor in it, and that will help judge distances between device to person and things like this. One aspect of the technology side of things that I would like to bring up is hidden features. So when GPS was released, I mean, the military and the like were using that a lot earlier, but when it was sort of made aware to the public, it had already existed. Devices have got a lot of like, built-in features that you can't either access or disable or remove. And it's just been going on a lot longer. So your devices, your phone, there's a lot more going on in there. Like Edward Snowden often says, if you turn your phone off, it's not actually really off at all. And the element of control that the manufacturers have over your devices is just monumental. So, yeah. The diplomats, again, as example, excuse me, just like every single civilian victim that I've spoken to, when they do go abroad and they're on the plane and then get there to their destination, it doesn't stop. It remains exactly the same with pinpoint precision. So I'm just going to move to the next slide because this depicts what I'm trying to explain. So satellites are missing from this image. They obviously will be much higher up, but you can see that there's the drones, and then the next highest up thing really in this image, just as an example, would be your cell towers, to your vehicles, to your homes, to your personal devices. And this image really is depicting normal everyday life. And this is what's being used to conduct these attacks, because that's what they are, attacks on human beings. So for me, I've experienced a lot of major differences whenever I've moved homes. During the times when I'm moving home, I feel serene and free and light and less of a headache all the time. My tinnitus just stops just like that. And once I get settled into the new property and I put all my things around on my electronic devices and just get settled in, it resumes and it goes straight back to what it was like at my last property. So while me as a person and my devices and belongings are in limbo, the people doing this to me are having to recalibrate and get ready because I'm moving somewhere new. So when I said before, the levels of organisation are amazing. I mean, it's not a very good thing to organise, but I've got to admit, it's quite impressive. At least they're very committed to what they're doing. So, yeah. The voices, I'd just like to discuss this at length because it's one of the most reported symptoms. So in our community, it's referred to as V2K or voice to skull. There are numerous patents for this. In fact, almost anything I'll say during this talk, there are patents for it. They're online, they're public domain, it's nothing new. So it misses out the outer ear and goes straight to the brain. Nobody else can hear it. They're carrier waves, so they can't be heard floating around. It's incredibly invasive. There is not some person sat with a headset on narrating your thoughts. It's AI. It has to be because it's so fast, almost faster than human reaction times. If you have a memory that you haven't thought of in 20 odd years, and they can just comment on it in real time and at length and accurately because they'll understand the memory, its context, its meaning. Is it a fond memory? Is it a bad memory? They can detect all these types of things. The level of invasiveness is staggering. I mean, it's incredible. For me, Menwith Hill RF base is not far away from me, and I can't prove this, but because of the experiments I've done with my mains boxes, with my personal devices, and getting them away from me, miles and miles away from me, just basic experiments, just using just really basic common sense and logic, I would say that some of it has to be coming from there or from another property nearby. Because some of this technology you could class as near field, and some is far field. But again, I've not seen how their setups are. I could be wrong. It's just my opinion. But yeah, there are numerous patents on this. which are all online. I can give you a link to a page on a website where a lot of them exist all at once. So yeah, they can induce almost anything to the body. I experience more often than not extreme heat and cold sensations and stabbing pains. The tinnitus I have, I referred to before, it's not real, it's synthetic. Sometimes I can turn it on and off. I've had episodes of paralysis where just like one finger won't work or just one hand, and it's very isolated and localized to a chosen area. I've had ear pains where it literally feels almost like somebody taking a pencil and shoving it through my eardrum. Constant headaches, pressure, and even with some bodily functions can be induced. And again, this is all just from a remote connection to a person's brain and central nervous system. And when, for example, I am made to feel extremely cold, my body goes into typical defense mode, so I get goosebumps on my arms, and the hairs stand on end to try and keep you warm. So your brain and your body is reacting to it as if it's actually happening. But I like to refer to it as it is in fact a simulation. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide, because with this comes health issues. This is radiation. That's what it is basically. We all know that if we go out into the sun, when you have an X-ray, when you go on a plane, when you talk on your phone, there is some level of radiation being involved, but we're told it's safe and it's not too much. Is it ionizing or non-ionizing? These types of questions are what comes up. But for civilian victims and for the diplomats, from what I've seen, what they've been reporting, health issues are occurring from this, and they seem to be primarily to do with balance, hearing, and neurological type things. I've heard lots of stories from victims all over the planet, and they typically all reporting a lot of the same types of issues, but there are some more broad ones. There's a lot of rheumatology and arthritic-based sort of things. I said before that for me, the majority of my health issues are to do with my immune system, which is just failing rapidly, I must say, as well. And a lot of the diplomats treated by Dr. Huffer do appear to have been reporting similar health issues as well. So it does seem that the brain and the balance system and the nervous system seem to be taking the brunt of all this, which makes sense as to how they're inducing these symptoms on to people. A lot of the diplomats were diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, and some longer standing civilian victims that I know have had cancers, and some have sadly passed away as well. So our health issues are just, a lot of them will be degenerative, and they're just going to continue over time. So yeah, I'm just going to move on to the next slide and discuss burns. Now, I've not had these. I'm lucky I've not had this at all. But I've seen images of fellow victims which are shocking. These images, I've just taken them as safe to use from the internet. I did not want to use images of anybody from the actual community itself that I know personally or know about a bit at least. But these are radiation burns, what you can see. So for a victim, they're very, again, isolated, very deliberate in certain points of their bodies. Quite often it's on their faces. I know of quite a lot who get treatment for them. There's one person in America, I won't use their name, that cannot walk, and their legs and feet, toes are just, I think, beyond all repair, and they have to have them bandaged and treated and cleaned every week. And I said to them at one point, well, what do the doctors say? Have they acknowledged this? And they go, they just come and deal with it, and then they go. And they've not had any acknowledgement as to how this has happened. They've not been in a fire. It's not like a chip track accident or anything like that. And I've had a few who have said to me that they've been accused of self-harm, as if they've done it to themselves, which I found particularly disgusting. Okay, so this slide, what you can see here is a victim who had found a foreign object in their body that they've not requested or asked for or been told about, and scar on their neck. And the image above is a piece of security-based type equipment. Now, I've not been able to locate in my body anything like this. I have had lots of types of body scans looking for things like this, but I did have a technical scan which did show signals emanating from my body, and that's what that piece of kit is in the image just there. So I've heard many stories where victims tend to think back through their lives. When could this have been done to me? If there is something in me, or if they find something, when could it have been done? So you think back to times you've undergone general anaesthetic, going to the dentist, even local anaesthetic, and again, nanotechnology goes into the bloodstream. So there's lots of different ways that this could be done. I've heard stories from some people who say that they felt groggy, fell asleep. When they woke up, they'd lost a day, and they believe that somebody had been into their home and they've found little marks and scars on their person. That is incredibly extreme. I believe that. I don't think that that has happened to me. I think for me, there'll be something in my bloodstream, to be honest. Doctors, when they come across things like this, will typically try to pass, if it's on an image like an X-ray, as calcium stone sort of build-ups. If it's in the brain, migraine spots is another excuse they tend to use. And if somebody successfully locates something and then has it removed, that is incredibly rare. And then if they get to keep it after that, that's also very rare. And the president of the association that I represent out of Belgium is one of the lucky ones. She's actually had numerous implants removed from her body, which she has not consented to at all. And the reason I want to discuss this piece of equipment is that when I described that I saw people in my apartment building before with a lot of equipment, it made me realise that they were removing that while this security expert did a scan of my property. That means that they're concerned about their equipment in their apartment, but not mine. Whatever's in mine, any covert devices, which I believe 100% there were. Yeah. So I think anything in my apartment must have been passive or easily turned off remotely or something like this. So your typical bug detectors might not pick them up. This piece of equipment you can see on the screen is a nonlinear junction detector. What it does is it sends out its own signal, which can be considered in itself a form of radiation, no matter how weak the signal is. A technical or security-based company typically use these might be hesitant on scanning a person using it, just because it sends out this signal. They'll want to cover themselves for health and safety reasons, typically, things like that. But yeah, basically it sends out a signal, activates them, thus can detect them, and that's why it's so special. And there's more and more people having these done. There's a few people in the victims community who are having these types of scans done. And in fact, there is a person who's running a group over in America who's doing amazing work at the moment, who actually recently, just last month, appeared on the InfoWars show and scanned Mr. Alex Jones with positive findings, which was quite incredible. And just to touch upon the nanotechnology, also referred to quite commonly as smart dust. So that could be rubbed onto your skin in a cream, it could be injected, it could be, as I said before, in local anaesthetic, like when you go to your dentist. We know that there's chemtrails, we know that there's dodgy things going on with vaccines. There was actually a study done a few years ago at a Spanish university, I can't remember which one, who tested some of the COVID vaccines. And they found that there was more gold, mercury, and graphene in them than there was actually vaccine, which kind of says it all. Gold, mercury, graphene, not sure why that's there. Bit coincidental. And graphene, I'm no expert, but just from doing very basic research, it absorbs radio frequencies and conducts electricity really, really well. So, yeah. Just moving on to the next slide. This is showing all the types of symptoms you can get from a particular condition. The closest diagnosis that I can think of that sort of covers this in a roundabout way is EHS, which stands for electrohypersensitivity. So it's becoming more and more widely accepted. It has been acknowledged by the World Health Association. But when I tried to talk to my GP about this last year, the way they looked at me said it all, I thought, I'm never going to try and say this to my GP ever again. They looked at me as if I was a complete and utter nutter and they'd never heard of it before. So it still has a fair old way to go. But it's basically a condition that you can say is caused by man-made electromagnetic fields. So Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, 5G, these types of things. I have read an article about somewhere down south in the UK a 5G mast was put up on the top of an apartment block sort of building, and every resident there started to feel unwell, and they all went to an EHS charity for some help and advice. And I believe they've had it properly sort of like recognised by the NHS because it was such a isolated sort of incident, and each of the residents in this building were experiencing the same things. So yeah, this moves me on to just discuss this wonderful gentleman, Mr. Barry Trower, who works with people fighting for EHS to become an accepted diagnosis globally among health services and systems. So Barry Trower, he was my association's head technical advisor. He has now sadly retired though. But he's a microwaves expert, physicist, and he was an MI5 spy for some time. He also created Tetra, which is the police radio waves that they use for their walkie-talkies. And he started speaking out about that, believing and doing research into if it was being used to induce aggression in police officers. I don't know enough about that to be able to really go into many details, but he's just noted for doing that. He's a whistleblower basically now, Barry Trower. He was employed to do certain things using pieces of technology he believed on other spies and relevant people that the government will typically be looking at. But when he learned that it was being done to innocent civilians, he started speaking out. His career was destroyed immediately. He was stripped of at least one of his PhDs, but he's continued to campaign for this cause for victims of this crime, and then the harm that a lot of the EMF around the world from all of this is causing just to the planet in general, so animals, plants, etc. He's been working with world leaders, royalty, giving speeches all over the planet, writing thesis papers. He's an amazing person. He's recently been doing, I think, a new thesis, something about the reason behind bees dying out, which, if you think about it, makes sense. They're drawing from the Earth's electromagnetic spectrum to navigate and to live and do their job, and it's harming them. You typically might not hear that from the BBC and the mainstream media, but this is one of the things. So yeah, Barry used to get calls from victims from all over the planet, and he always took the time to try and help them. And the first thing he would typically say to them is throw away your phone, get rid of your smartphone. Unfortunately, in this day and age, not many people do it, and I'm guilty of that. I've got my phone sat here next to me now, so yeah. So this basically is an incredibly well-oiled machine, and I'm just going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so what I'd like to discuss now is the more sort of social elements to all of this. So a key feature recurring among all victims is the need of the people committing the crime to keep the victim in a constant state of fear and isolation. There's also incapacity to work. A lot of victims cannot work. Not many are able to hold down, let's say, a normal job. Sleep deprivation, that's still up there in the top 10 of effective torture techniques. And then we've got secondary depression and anxiety. But one of the main elements that comes with this is mental health interventions, and wrongful ones as well. So often this is illegally conducted by doctors and police, who quite often can tell that the victim is a victim of this crime, but they won't acknowledge that. And the protocol, whether it's written in training manuals or not, is irrelevant. The protocol is simply mental health. And that's how most people are treated. I'd say that 8 out of 10 victims have had something relating to mental health in their experiences against their will as well. So if we take just basic statistics alone, if we've got psychiatrists who began training in the 80s and worked throughout the 90s and still to this day, they will have encountered at least one victim, prompting them to ask colleagues and their peers questions and things like this. Just very basic statistics alone. Some are involved happily, some will be being paid off and maybe not too happy about it, but feel threatened. There are numerous doctors who have tried to help the victims' community and have had their careers destroyed. So there's lots of different reasons as to why they will not acknowledge this as a proper sort of crime and health condition. So yeah. As you can see on this slide, we've got a story that actually took place earlier this year, where a woman reported neighbours using lasers and technology, beaming them into her house, and I believe voices as well, which were inciting her to do things. And she ended up killing her child, believing it was the right thing and best thing that she could do for them. She's been placed under a permanent hospital mental health order under the Mental Health Act. Not so long ago as well, this happens a lot in America. A man in Kentucky murdered some of his neighbours, I believe two of them, claiming that he was being tortured with the use of directed energy weapons. So this person, I'd say, and the woman know that they're a victim of something and that they're not mentally ill, but will not be believed. And either way, they've actually committed a crime themselves. So, rightly so that they are arrested or placed into a mental health institution. And then literally just days ago, there's been another story here in the UK of a 12-year-old girl who was hearing voices and was being told her mother is not who she claimed to be and that she needed to go to heaven. She was actually intervened with and sectioned. Unfortunately, she was somehow able to kill herself whilst sectioned, which is atrocious and is being investigated. That was literally days ago. There's also a notable case that I'll just touch upon, a serial killer in the 70s who may possibly been an experiment and a part of the MK Ultra CIA experimentation program. Now, he killed, I believe, in the late 70s, around 13 people in America, and he was hearing voices he believed were the voice of God, and they were telling him there's going to be an earthquake in India in 2 weeks' time, and if you kill this woman here in California, this one woman, it will prevent that earthquake in India from ever taking place. So if you make this decision to end one life, you will save many in another country, which is quite absurd, but that's true. There's a lot of documentaries about him, and I think there's even some interviews with him as well. It's just a case I'll just touch upon now. So here in the UK, me and my colleagues here are often tasked with helping victims get out of situations like these, and I'll just stick with being sectioned as an example here. So, more often than not, there is around 5 officers to 1 civilian, or maybe sometimes more. Half the time they don't have a doctor present, or there's no paperwork present, or both. The majority of the time, the person is not, posing a threat to self or others. They've never been in such services before. Very often they try to record it and document the intervention, and their phone is taken from them, the file deleted from the phone, which is tampering with evidence. Then they're taken away. And that falls in UK law, more under kidnapping than anything else in UK law. So that's something we're tasked with on quite a regular basis to try and help people get out of these types of situations. And as I say, I'll just move on slides. This is where it comes into play that some people, like I touched upon before, believe that the DSM-5, which is the big manual on mental disorders, could have been potentially created around the 50s, the times when these experiments were just sort of in their infancy, as a sort of smokescreen ready and in place for this crime. Because a lot of the disorders in this book cover the sort of symptoms that victims of this are reporting. So the bad practices and abuse of power from mental health professionals, and then in conjunction with the police, is a major part in all of this. It's huge. I don't know many civilian victims who've not had at least one mental health incident happen in their time. And then this slide, as you can see here, kidnapping and sectioning. So kidnapping, unlawfully taking a person away by force or fraud without their consent and without a lawful reason. So this is literally the definition of kidnapping, and that is what is happening to victims here in the UK and in many other countries as well. So it's not really anything new. And myself and a group of around 25 others here in the United Kingdom are taking part in a group litigation centred around this as well. It's a pending case, so I can't go into too many details, but what I'll say is that some of the charges are collusion, sabotage, wrongful mental health interventions, wrongful police practices, and things like this. And what's happened is the foreman has experienced the courts trying to prevent the case from being successful. He's been stalked almost every time he's gone to hand in paperwork for this. And then when he does hand in the paperwork, he's then told weeks later, we never received this, you didn't submit this, you missed a deadline. And he didn't. He took to filming himself doing these things then so that they couldn't continue to do this, and then they found different ways of trying to sabotage it. And what he's been able to do is, with some of the documents that the defence have been submitting, he's now gotten hold of these, and they've actually left a paper trail of their attempts to sabotage the case, which has now been included in our own evidence against them. So, in short, basically, they've made some very, very arrogant mistakes. So, yeah. So this is basically an infringement on a person's basic human rights. The list of crimes entailed in it is ridiculous. It just goes on and on. We've got the stalking, the sabotage. There's ridiculous levels of hierarchy of criminals and then collaboration between them all. It's actually, I mean, the technology and the levels of coordination, it's impressive. It's just a shame it's been used for such horrible reasons when it could be used for such good things, really. So yeah, there's illegal surveillance. We can throw into there psychological torture. A lot of victims have been illegally live streamed, and that's something I'm going to come to shortly. Hacking, stalking, assault, conspiracy to this, insight to this. It goes on and on and on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to the next slide and discuss the work that I do and how we're trying to combat this. Okay, so the main group that I help with, I am UK representative and board member to ICATOR. As you can see on this slide here, we've just got a few details about our main goal, which is an international class action lawsuit. But ICATOR stands for the International Coalition Against Electronic Torture and Robotization of Living Beings. They're a human rights association, government registered out of Belgium. They were founded in 2016 by Melanie Vritshan, who is ex-Belgian Space Agency staff and a victim for around, I believe, 15 years. In the past, they've conducted technical scans in a Faraday cage. They've worked with toxicologists, security specialists, held public rallies, and done lots of media projects and more. The main goals we're working towards at this time are we've been invited to speak at a United Nations event, which we're preparing for now and will take place next year in 2026. And this is with the CRPD department inside of the UN. And the CRPD department is the Committee for Rights with Persons with Disabilities. And we will go to, well, the president, and other colleagues will travel to Geneva in person to do this next year. So because of the type of department this is within the UN, we need to ensure that this is recognised as a condition, but not mislabelled. We need to make sure that it is labelled that, yes, it is a condition, but it's being caused by criminal activity and the misuse of technology. And we'd also need to be able to show how this prevents us in life and is becoming a disability and debilitating, that is preventing us from having a social life and being a part of local communities and wider society itself. And then we're also looking to create a medical clinic again in Belgium with some doctors that have recently come out of the woodwork to offer aid to victims that the president of ICATOR is speaking with at this time. But the main goal is our international class action lawsuit. Having found legal representation, we've been working towards this for the last couple of years, and we are getting to the stage where it's not ready to file just yet. We need to take our time in working towards this. But basically, our legal firm, as you can see on this slide here, are Droit Libertés, which translates to rights and freedoms in English. They typically take on large public interest cases. For part of this, there would be a large government petition and potentially a televised hearing, which will do really good for raising awareness. After many meetings and discussions, it was decided that the case will be both civil and criminal to allow maximum opportunity and compensation on the civil side if it were to win. And we've got around 300 people taking part from all over the planet, and that number is growing by the month as well. It will be against the state for not protecting citizens until the case is filed. There are some areas that are a bit blind at this time, but that's the goal. And we have to begin in Belgium because that's where Equator is registered. However, if we were to fail in Belgium, we would then appeal, and that would likely be via the European Court of Human Rights, or potentially the ICC, the International Criminal Court. And in some ways, this is almost favourable. We want to win initially, of course, but because we have to begin in Belgium, it will be against the Belgian state. If we were to appeal at the higher level, it would mean that each participant's government that they belong to would also be held applicable. So, as you can see, it is actually favourable. So our members will be able to submit evidence and/or a witness statement. The witness statement is important because there's a lot of people who don't have the luxury of being able to pay for and obtain decent evidence. So, yeah. The main goals from the lawsuit are to create new laws, regulations, raise awareness, and to create a legal precedent which would act as a sort of framework for other future legal cases. And it will certainly help with the victims being heard better in their native countries as well. I also help out with a UK-based website which is called Targeted Survivors. We view ourselves as a sort of activism and pressure group. We hold an annual rally outside number 10 Downing Street in London, and we've got numerous campaigns on the go, one of which is encouraging victims to try and contact their local MP to discuss this matter. Responses from them typically is negative or not at all. Last year, myself and my colleague actually did speak with an MP who's a member of the Privy Council and referred us to a senior minister who we're still waiting to hear back from. I have spoken with a member of their team, not the minister themselves, just a member of their team who was pretty decent. They actually heard me and listened to what I had to say. They asked some direct questions as well, which gave me the chance to sort of say, I appreciate your suggestions, but they've been exhausted. And quite a few of them would only place a victim of this in even more danger, and explain why that would happen. So it sort of led to them saying, I'm going to go away and try and make something happen for you. We don't know what might happen. We will see. And there's also a couple of doctors that I'm talking to here in the United Kingdom as well. I'm trying to make something happen, but they have some health and safety sort of risks and concerns that they're thinking about. We will see what happens. I'm also board member to the Allen Institute of Human Rights. I've started helping with them more recently in the last year and a half. So they're a human rights association out of Boston, Massachusetts. Their founder is a man named Frank Allen, who is a long-standing pillar in the victims community. He also runs a group called Targeted Massachusetts, which is more for raising awareness, and he does a lot of radio shows with special guests and people prominent and more sort of normal victims inside of the community. He's also doing some really, really good work. And finally, I'll move on to the next slide, and I'll just discuss the other and last remaining bit of work that I help with in the victims community. Okay, so this is the last part of the talk. I'm just going to explain to you what this work is. So this is a company called Amy's Audios. Amy is a victim in America, ex-military, and retrained as a digital forensics expert. She discovered that embedded in audio files recorded by typically just victims, there are communications that are radio communications, typically of criminals involved in a person's situation. And they can be analysed, cleaned and transcribed and put into a written report. Just to explain this, if I were to sit here and record myself sat in silence now and press play, you'd typically not hear it very well. It needs to be run through a typical forensic treatment involving a lot of amplification and noise reduction. And once this is done, you're left with a sound that sounds rather harsh. I do have some examples to play for you. Your listeners during this will likely not hear exactly what is in the file that has been already found. It takes time to let your ears get used to it, and you need to use critical listening skills because what you've got is a lot of different statements of people talking, overlapping, and then digital interference like a distortion hiding all of it across the entire frequency spectrum of the audio file. It is in short, people logging into chat rooms or what can be called red rooms, typically using an illegal platform, likely the deep web, and they're paying with cryptocurrency to log in to these chat rooms to watch and or pay and be involved in leasing the use of technology. And that's a really simple explanation for it. It requires this unorthodox treatment to get to it, and then we just clean it and transcribe it and write a written report for clients who are nearly always targeted individuals. So what they're talking about in these communications and these chat rooms is about what's being done to the victim and in real time as well. They're typically talking about technology, networks, hacking, drones, connections to various different things, and more often than not, they discuss the victim or client in question in real time and what they're doing at the time the recording in question was made that has been sent to us to analyse. It could be viewed as similar to playing on the Xbox, where people can play a game with a headset on with anybody on the planet, anywhere. That's a really good way of sort of describing this. There is tech support even offered in this, where people might say, my live feed has gone down, and there'll be a tech support team who will try and rectify that. It's almost like a strategical PC game sometimes in some instances. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So this is typically what it's looking like when we're doing this. This piece of software is what I like to use. It's called Isotope RX9. It's an audio restoration suite. So what you can see here is a blend of the audio waveform and then the spectrogram view. And these are the two different formats of viewing audio. So the time domain and the frequency domain. And this is what it looks like when we're doing this. And we work in 10-second frames. We need to account for overlapping statements. Sometimes it helps to use EQ and isolate certain frequency bands. Notch filters can remove if there's like a chiming noise that's very piercing and it's hindering you from listening to this. You might want to remove it completely and take your time with it. Allow your ears to get used to it because it is quite a harsh sound. And sit there and listen, clean, transcribe. So that's basically the best description that I can give. I think the other way to say this is that what we're learning from this is almost from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And because of the things that they're discussing, like hacking and surveillance and stalking, we can prove numerous things from this. So if we collect details, let's say one of the criminals discusses an address or a location, we might be able to get some property deeds or tenancy agreement or land registry details. If they're talking about drones and there's an airport nearby to the victim, we could look at aviation licenses and things like this. So it is waiting and still undergoing peer review. It's in its infancy. It's been sort of being done since 2014 when she set up her business. So it's already been used in numerous legal cases and is easily replicated. And this is something that we're working towards now, right at this time. So what I'm going to do is play a couple of examples for you. So I'm just going to move to the next slide. And that one, there we go. So here's one I prepared earlier. So I'm just going to play this. The statement here is saying the audio is in your head. So I'm just going to play that. Now, your listeners, again, John, they might not be able to properly make out what is being said. I think it would help if we put these files onto a G Drive link and you put them in the description for your listeners to hear. But that is, when I say that it is quite harsh to the ears, it is. We need to allow our ears to really get used to this. I'll just play it again. The audio is in your head. We've got another one here, which is even harsher. What a lot of these criminals in these chat rooms do is select a vocal effect. So they could sound like a robot or a monster or a cartoon character. And this is typically to hide their voices and disguise them so that it could not be used as a voice print in a courtroom. So I'll just play this. So I'm going to just play that one more time. We go in the red room now. I can't really replicate that voice, but that's what's being said here. We've got one here which says the words project stalking. So I'll play this. Now you can hear all the other interference there. There's multiple statements taking place all at the same time, and this is where we need to be very careful in terms of our analysis and really isolate the statement. Sometimes it helps to slow statements down so you can really get to the nitty-gritty of the syllables being used. There's a lot of phonetics that comes into the equation here, speech and phonetics. Being able to tell like ethnicities, accents, that's if they're not using a vocal effect, because if they are, that cannot be reversed. We can't take that off. It's really complicated and it can be quite tedious work, but it is incredibly interesting and very, very useful as well. As I said, her work is undergoing peer review, and she's had an essence of it patented into an app, which will be in the next year or so available to download on the Play Store, just like any app. And it will have in it these tools, like I'll show you this EQ. So it will have something like this built in so that you can isolate certain frequency bands and bring out sort of areas that are more prominent and do it in real time as a demonstration to anybody. There will be a 5-second or maybe a 7-second delay for processing time. But yeah, it's exciting stuff. So what I'll do now is just give you a bit of an example as to something that myself and Amy Holden did the other year. So she came to stay with me a couple of years ago to train me up to do this work. And we both had the same idea, which was, let's record ourselves 24/7 and see if your criminals and my criminals unite during this time. And sure enough, they did. So what we found is when I do my own audio analysis and just sort of have a look and listen as to what they're doing, it's all British accents. And on this occasion, it was a lot of British and American sort of accents. And we analysed it, and they're using my name, they're using Amy Holden's name, they know my address, they know her address, they're discussing what we're doing at the time, and so much more. There was a ridiculous amount of information that we were able to capture. And that's just one example that I can give to you to sort of try and explain this. And if I just move on to this is an example of one of our reports for a client. And as you can see here, it's sort of telling you that, like I said, we work in 10-second frames to really get to the nitty-gritty. There can be a lot of statements overlapping in just one 10-second frame. So we typically work on an hour-by-hour basis. It depends on what the client is wanting. So you can see here, there's a statement there. She's on the damn phone. So there's a lot of information here that without context, a person will not understand. At the time this recording was made, the client was on the phone. There's the statement there, project stalking, which I've just played to you. The person was reporting heavy sort of gang stalking and organised stalking. At the bottom here, you can see Garfield Road, and that was 2 minutes away from where the person lived at the time. And again, just for an example, had we been able to act upon this straight away, there's a time lapse between sending the file, analysing the file, and completing the report. But had we been able to act, I'd have been getting a private investigator to stake out Garfield Road and have a look at what's going on there. Maybe look at getting some tenancy agreements and things like this as well. So it's really interesting stuff. Very interesting indeed. I've done a lot of experimenting myself using decent microphones, driving out into the country. I've used old VHS tapes to just have a mess around with trying to do this with an analog medium. The tapes were very old and even had a bit of mold on them. But yeah, I had them converted. Just wanted to see, just basically experiments and helping build a framework for her business to expand and thrive. Because this is incredibly good work. She does sometimes capture details that don't just pertain to this level of targeting or Havana Syndrome, and some of it is about trafficking, for example, and drug dealing. It's a secure method of communication being used for lots of different criminal types of activity. So it could revolutionize certain areas of law enforcement and how they operate. So that's basically it. I'm going to give you some of the audio files and this presentation so you can put it in the description for your listeners to have a look. But I suppose I'll just end here with a sort of final message to the public. So there's a lot of things going on around the world, and I think with respect to the general public, more and more people are starting to wake up as to what's happening and what it means, and in so many different countries. These neurorights bills that are being passed are to protect our brains, quite literally, because there's all these emerging technologies coming out, and we don't know exactly what brain data they could be taking behind the scenes without consent. We've got things like a pre-crime program, which is almost straight out of the film with Tom Cruise, Minority Report. We've got digital IDs here in the United Kingdom. We've got needing the COVID passes and being under lockdown. We've got a lot of strange things taking place, which are all centered around control. At the core of all of this, it's basically control. And I think it's important that the general public become aware of this crime, because it ideally needs to be lumped in with these other very concerning global issues where we're really being surveilled and monitored and controlled to such an extent. The thing that the politicians around the world have for decades now referred to as the New World Order, I would say they've pretty much done in style, under our noses and without touching us. And it is a good thing that the general public are really waking up and really understanding that this is not right, and it's infringing on our human rights and our freedom. Even our freedom of speech here in the United Kingdom is being stripped from us as we speak. There's been other journalists that I've spoken to. Some of them have not gone very well just due to me not being very well myself, and some limitations as to what the mainstream media will or will not or cannot report on. So I really do thank you for the opportunity of just sharing a few of the key major areas surrounding this crime, and I appreciate it. So yeah, I just think really this is control at the centre, and the general public need to be aware of what's really going on behind the scenes.
Scary. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
much, yeah.
No, very good. Very good. Thank you for sharing all that.
No, it's fine. I appreciate the platform. I appreciate your time, and that people will see this and start joining the dots, because it's not just about this. We as a nation and on a more global basis need to try and stand up to these people, because if we don't, they're going to succeed in what is basically the New World Order. That's how I sum it up. It's all about control.
Mm.
That's the fundamental here, just control.
So if you enjoyed this show and want the full-length director's cut with a bonus 30 minutes, including more Q&A with Brenda, become a Patreon member and also gain access to the entire library of unedited episodes, plus bonus content that was too hot for YouTube to handle.